We're just watching the system crash. That's the blunt warning echoing from some of the world's leading marine scientists. And it's not some distant hypothetical scenario, it's happening right now. The oceans, once believed to be limitless in their resilience, are increasingly fragile, teetering under the mounting weight of human-induced carbon emissions. Could it be that we've already crossed the line into an era of dangerous ocean acidification from which there's no easy retreat? Welcome to this deep dive into the hidden crisis unfolding beneath the waves, where we'll uncover the startling truth about runaway ocean acidification, its profound impact on marine ecosystems, and the urgent steps needed to safeguard life beneath the surface. Throughout this journey, we'll explore why polar waters are becoming ground zero for an acidification assault, how certain forms of planktonic marine snails are fast losing their once perfect habitat, and whether recent international agreements are enough to stave off the worst damage. Before the end, we'll see how climate change, overfishing, and deep-sea mining are combining with acidification to threaten the very heart of ocean life. In this episode, we will cut through the scientific jargon and shine a light on the jaw-dropping realities uncovered by new studies. How large stretches of the marine environment have surpassed safe thresholds of acidity, how entire coral reef ecosystems may be entering a period of unprecedented stress, and why scientists believe we first crossed this line around the year 2000. Together, we'll consider the bleak scenario of rising carbon emissions that continue to push us into potentially dire territory, and we'll ask, is the world ready to unite and pull us back from the brink? To keep you fully engrossed, each revelation in this script will build upon the previous one, slowly peeling back the layers of how this vast crisis has been hiding just below the ocean's surface, quite literally, and how it lurks deeper than we ever imagined. In other words, every new piece of information connects directly to a growing sense of urgency. So, stick around, because the deeper we go, the more astonishing and critical our discoveries become. Let's begin our exploration with the big picture. More than 3 decades of research have shown that the world's oceans absorb a huge portion of our carbon dioxide emissions. On the surface, that might sound like a blessing, buffering the atmosphere from higher concentrations of greenhouse gases. But with every molecule of carbon dioxide that seawater draws in, a quiet chemical process unfolds, generating additional hydrogen ions that effectively reduce the availability of carbonate ions. For marine life forms that rely on calcium carbonate to build shells and skeletons, think corals, mollusks, and certain plankton species, this shift can be devastating. Marine experts have long waved red flags about this creeping phenomenon known as ocean acidification. Now, evidence has arrived showing that such acidification is not only spreading across near-surface waters, but also extending down to depths of nearly 200 meters, which is roughly 656 feet, threatening biodiversity at multiple layers of the marine world. Even more alarming, researchers say that in polar regions, where colder waters amplify the absorption of carbon dioxide, the pace of acidification is accelerating beyond what many had anticipated. The results, wrapped up in a landmark study published around June 2025, paint a troubling picture. At least 4 of 7 major ocean basins have pushed past safe biological thresholds for healthy ocean chemistry. Worse still, when you peer below the surface, the situation grows even more tense. About 60% of global ocean areas have, at least according to the chemical criteria used in this study, already breached safe parameters through the top 200 meters of depth, in contrast to about 40% at the surface alone. If you're wondering why that matters so profoundly, consider that a large share of ocean life, countless species, from larval fish to planktonic communities, depend on these subsurface zones for food, shelter, and sensitive stages of development. When these waters become too acidic, we see stress responses across the entire food web, from the smallest drifting snail to the largest predator that relies on everything below it to survive. Pause for a moment and imagine the oceans as a grand mosaic of interdependent creatures. Corals form reefs that protect coastlines, fish communities maintain nutrient cycles, and plankton are the basis of an intricate oceanic food chain that helps support billions of people worldwide. Yet, this mosaic is unraveling under the combined pressures of warming seas, decreasing oxygen, intensifying pollution, overfishing, and now a palpably deepening acidity that might test the resilience of even the most adaptable species. Strikingly, the same study suggests that the threshold for maintaining so-called safe ocean acidification levels may have been exceeded around the year 2000 if we adopt a more conservative standard, around 10% aragonite saturation, that factors in the wide range of species sensitivities. Compared to the older benchmark of 20%, this new threshold implies that the planet's marine networks could be more severely threatened than we realized. The upshot? Some experts say the moment for reversing these trends was at least 2 decades ago. Still, let this be your cue for optimism in the face of dire data. Many marine scientists insist that while we might be in a red alert zone, it isn't a foregone conclusion that the ocean's fate is sealed. Committing to major cuts in carbon emissions can still slow or eventually halt the acidification process, giving vulnerable ecosystems time to adapt or recover. In the meantime, protective measures such as new marine preserves, fishing restrictions, and direct mitigation strategies could offer local relief. Just think, efforts to reduce land-based pollution can at least stabilize parts of the water column, preventing excessive nutrient runoff that worsens acidification. Before moving on to more specifics, here's a brief but vital reminder. If you find these discoveries astounding and want to see more investigations like this, consider showing your support. If you're enjoying this content, take a moment to share it with someone who cares about the planet as much as you do. Or give this episode a thumbs up. It might feel like a small act, but your engagement helps widen our circle of awareness. Back to the story. One of the more startling details from the study concerns certain calcifying species, whose living conditions have shrunk drastically. Tropical corals, famous for forming vibrant reefs that nurture countless fish, have potentially seen their suitable habitat space plummet by around 43%. Meanwhile, the polar pteropods, the delicate free-swimming snails that serve as a critical food source for fish, whales, and seabirds, could have lost around 61% of their habitable zone. Even coastal bivalves, those shellfish that so many cultures rely upon for protein, have taken a 13% hit in their living range. Now, if you zoom out from ocean acidification alone, you'll find that our seas must also cope with rising temperatures, dropping oxygen levels, relentless overfishing, plastic pollution, microplastic invasions, and the potential onset of deep-sea mining. Each stressor compounds the toll on marine life. Corals already driven to the brink by bleaching events brought on by heat waves may now have to fight new battles in waters that sabotage their skeletal formation. Fish that can tolerate a narrower temperature range find themselves in warmer and simultaneously more corrosive waters. And the pteropods that are a linchpin for so many higher species, they may see their shells slowly dissolve unless conditions improve. Let's highlight that harrowing risk of mass extinctions. Historically, shifts in carbon dioxide levels, global temperatures, and ocean oxygen availability have aligned with some of Earth's most devastating extinction events. Many scientists caution that we must treat the current resurgence of acidification with the same gravity as those prehistoric cataclysms. The difference, of course, is that modern society actually has the means to recognize the signals and take proactive steps. We are not at the mercy of natural geological cycles. Instead, we're at the mercy of our collective choices, primarily how swiftly we reduce our dependence on fossil fuels and how diligently we protect critical marine habitats. That's where global diplomacy steps in. Over recent years, there's been a major push to confirm the so-called High Seas Treaty, formally recognized as the Agreement on Marine Biological Diversity of Areas Beyond National Jurisdiction. By establishing rules that facilitate the creation of new marine protected areas on the high seas, the treaty seeks to extend conservation efforts to at least 30% of the world's oceans by the year 2030. As of the latest tally, about 50 countries have ratified the treaty, with 60 needed for it to fully come into force. Many see this as a pivotal moment that could lock in partial safeguards against escalating environmental damage. Yet some top researchers argue that conventional or partial protections might no longer suffice. They invoke the notion that, given the severity of ocean acidification, plus warming, pollution, and other factors, traditional fishing activities in international waters should be halted or drastically curtailed to allow marine ecosystems a window of recovery. They also warn that deep-sea mining, once viewed with excitement for its mineral potential, could unleash far more destruction on fragile seafloor habitats that are already grappling with chemical and temperature shifts. Adding to the urgency, marine advocates note that setting aside crucial refugiae, places where stable or more tolerable ocean chemistry might persist in the near future, could be a lifeline for modern ocean life. Identifying these safer zones for corals, kelp forests, or other especially vulnerable communities might become a cornerstone of conservation strategy. Of course, pinpointing such areas will require advanced metrics, real-time pH monitoring, thorough biodiversity surveys, and cooperation among researchers worldwide. If this feels like an overwhelming mess of unprecedented challenges, that's not far from the truth. However, the most central driver remains glaringly straightforward: carbon dioxide emissions. The more pollution we generate by burning fossil fuels, the more we supercharge climate change and feed ocean acidification. Even if we halted emissions today, scientists say that the ocean would continue absorbing the carbon dioxide that's already in the atmosphere for decades. Achieving net zero or even net negative emissions is the best shot at reversing, or at least halting, further harm in the long term. Of course, talk of decarbonization inevitably leads to discussions of advanced strategies like carbon capture and storage, or direct air capture. Among the more experimental concepts are methods to directly alter seawater chemistry, such as ocean alkalinity enhancement. Proponents argue these could, in select cases, help restore a safer chemical balance and effectively soak up more carbon dioxide. Yet caution is warranted. These geoengineering approaches remain largely untested at scale, raising concerns over unintended consequences, from harm to local marine life to shifts in deep water pH that might disrupt entire ecosystems. Some experts are resolute in rejecting large-scale tinkering with Earth's systems, even if it's intended to stabilize the climate or reduce acidification. They note that artificially lowering surface temperatures through solar radiation management, for instance, might do nothing to curtail the continuous flood of carbon dioxide pouring into oceans, meaning acidification would still intensify. For them, the moral and ecological cost of interfering with the planet's life support systems is simply too extreme. They insist the top priority must remain the swift elimination of fossil fuels, coupled with a grand pivot to renewable energy. Between these two poles, cautious acceptance of carefully tested carbon dioxide removal on one hand, and full-throated rejection of large-scale geoengineering on the other, lies a messy middle. No matter what side you lean toward, the underlying principle is unanimous. We must tackle carbon emissions at their source, or the rest is just triage. Yet for many coastal communities, indigenous groups, and fishers, ocean acidification is already wreaking havoc on their livelihoods. Some shellfish farmers have reported that their hatcheries need specially treated water just so baby oysters can form shells. Coral reef tourism in certain tropical nations experiences ebbing visitor interest as once glorious corals turn pale, and fish stocks become more unpredictable. This all underscores the fundamental truth. Ocean acidification is not a niche scientific debate. It affects food security, local economies, tourism, and entire cultural traditions bound to the seas. In fact, coral reefs, among the first ecosystems to ring the alarm bells, stand as a grim symbol. The bleaching events that have punctuated the last few decades are not simply cosmetic. When corals bleach, they expel symbiotic algae that feed them. Repeated bleaching weakens or kills them, leading to barren stretches of white skeletal remains. Overlay this with rising acidification, and corals face a double hit that can hamper their ability to rebuild. Corals have endured environmental shifts over millions of years, but rarely at the speed and scale we're inflicting today. Up in the colder realms, traveling from the Arctic to the Antarctic, cold water corals and planktonic communities might be in even greater danger. Because cold water holds more dissolved carbon dioxide, it becomes acidic more quickly. The beloved polar pteropods, with paper-thin shells, highlight the vulnerability. When water hits certain acidity levels, the chemical processes that make shells stable unravel, and the snail's once sturdy shells may develop pitted surfaces or cracks. If pteropods fail to thrive, species further up the food web, including Atlantic salmon, face cascading effects. Scientists also worry about oxygen depletion, meaning areas of hypoxia or dead zones may expand in tandem with acidification, especially in nutrient-polluted coastal locales. Some fish can flee these zones if they have space to migrate, but bottom-dwelling creatures can be trapped, leading to large-scale die-offs that are difficult to recover from. With so many overlapping stressors, it's as if the ocean is juggling flaming torches. One slip, and entire habitats could incinerate before our eyes. Amid these sobering realities, a growing contingent of marine biologists, oceanographers, and conservationists are urging us to link the fight against acidification with defending marine biodiversity outright. They argue that strategically placed marine protected areas, strict regulations on destructive industrial activities, and restoration efforts such as planting more seagrass or mangroves can all help buy time for marine organisms. Healthy seagrass beds, for instance, can locally mitigate acidification by absorbing carbon dioxide, forming microrefugia that might shield juvenile fish or shell-bearing critters. If you've found yourself held captive by these stories of oceanic upheaval, and you want to stay informed as we push deeper into the mysteries and solutions of ocean health, consider subscribing. Staying connected ensures you'll be the first to know about breakthroughs, strategies, and updates in this rapidly evolving field. On the international stage, momentum is building. After the most recent ocean conference in the city of New York in 2025, fresh commitments to expand or establish marine protected areas were announced from multiple nations. But critics are quick to point out that announcing intentions is the easy part. ACIDIFICATIon. It's the follow-through that often stalls. Some fear that by the time new preserves or fishing restrictions become fully operational, climate change will have advanced enough to render those partial measures less effective. That's why a handful of scientists push for what they call radical ocean protection, a suite of measures that might include a global temporary moratorium on industrial-scale fishing in some high seas regions and an immediate ban on all new deep-sea mining projects. Proponents of these strong measures say, the ocean requires a breather from relentless exploitation, at least for a window of several years, to help species recover and to give us time to drastically reduce carbon emissions. Those advocating for deep-sea mining often emphasize the potential trillions of dollars in valuable metals like nickel, cobalt, or manganese. Yet this is pitted against an equally strong argument. Once you tear up the seafloor, the slow-growing corals, sponges, and myriad weirdly wonderful life forms that dwell down there might never recover on any human timescale. With an acidification crisis already bruising ocean systems, do we dare pile on any new major disruption? On top of that, there's the complicated domain of oceanology that calls for intensifying real-time monitoring. Many believe that until we thoroughly map regions at risk from rising acidity or identify which creatures are most susceptible, we simply won't develop effective conservation strategies that tackle acidification's root causes. Extrapolating from a handful of data points might not capture the complexity of this phenomenon. Nevertheless, a reaffirming takeaway from the experts is that we still have a shot to steer the planet back toward equilibrium. If we substantially cut greenhouse gas emissions now, limit destructive activities at sea, restore vital coastal habitats, and perhaps deploy cautious, targeted carbon removal, we stand a decent chance of preserving the core framework of ocean life. The trick will be mobilizing governments, local stakeholders, and entire industries to pivot from the status quo to a more sustainable blueprint. The real question, can we muster that collective resolve before too many thresholds are irreversibly crossed? The next few years are critical. Scientists widely agree that to keep global temperature rises within 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, a figure that seems more tenuous by the day, we must drastically curb our emissions virtually immediately. Failure to do so could leave us on a trajectory to 2 or 3 degrees Celsius of warming, or even beyond, by the year 2100. At those temperature ranges, ocean acidification will be the least of our problems. Catastrophic storms, soaring sea levels, crippling droughts, and widespread ecological collapses may define the century. So, here we are, faced with a heavily acidifying ocean that resonates far beyond the realm of fish and coral reefs. The onset of warmer marine heat waves, decreased oxygen levels, and the creeping dissolution of fragile shells or reefs collectively hint at a great unraveling of ocean biodiversity. Yet, within this dark horizon, many see a spark of hope if the right policy shifts occur, like an emergency brake on carbon emissions and a dramatic expansion of ocean safeguards. But solution talk means addressing real constraints. Expanding protected zones to cover 30% of the ocean by the year 2030 is an essential starting point, yet many call it insufficient in light of consistent data that show acidification is deeper and wider than earlier predictions. We must also ask whether these zones will be merely paper parks, areas that exist in name only without adequate enforcement against fishing, drilling, or other destructive practices. What about countries that depend heavily on ocean resources? Nations with robust fishing industries, or those eyeing deep-sea mineral exploitation, may resist aligning with stricter mandates. Economic interests remain powerful, and short-term gains can overshadow the longer-term well-being of the world's largest ecosystem. Bridging that gap is a challenge for diplomats, environmental advocates, and local communities compelled to protect the basis of their food supply and cultural traditions. In an ideal scenario, cooperation would take precedence. Coastal nations could lead by example, shutting down harmful fishing techniques within their exclusive waters, while wealthier countries accelerate the shift to renewable energy, slashing emissions, and funding marine research. The High Seas Treaty, once fully validated by that minimum threshold of 60 ratifications, could unify global efforts to conserve biodiversity in the open ocean. Of course, the situation calls for honest realism. Even with concerted action, it will take centuries for the oceans to rebalance their acidification. This underscores the point that our fate depends on immediate decisions. The longer we delay, the steeper the climb back. Overcoming the inertia of fossil fuel dependence is no small feat, but a crisis at this scale demands big, coordinated moves, and soon. In closing, the ocean's story is a paradox of fragility and resilience. Despite ceaseless human pressures, pockets of thriving marine life still endure, and nature is quick to rebound when given a chance. The question is how far we let the pendulum swing toward devastation before we collectively draw the line. We have reams of data, urgent recommendations from experts, and a rapidly closing window to shift the narrative from one of potential collapse to one of cautious resurgence. This turning point might define our legacy. Will we be remembered as the generation that stood on the sidelines while the seas approached a threshold of irreversible change? Or will we be the ones who recognized the alarm bells, mobilized on a global scale, and steered the planet toward sustainability? The next chapter is up to all of us. The oceans are calling for swift, decisive action. Let's answer that call by investing in clean energy, setting firm regulations against destructive practices, and championing new discoveries that can help reverse the damage. Our own destiny rides on the health of our seas, economically, ecologically, and even spiritually. Thank you for joining this quest to illuminate the critical issue of ocean acidification. I hope today's exploration sparks a renewed sense of urgency and a spark of hope. We can keep the conversation going, share what you've learned, talk to friends and family, and stay connected for future updates. Together, we can channel our concern into transformative change, ensuring that the ocean's tapestry of life continues to enrich our world in all its overwhelming beauty.